Hello, I'm Duncan, architecture editor at Golf Digest, with another extensive look at a single hole, this time the 11th at Augusta National. Augusta National is among a handful of courses, like St. Andrews, Riviera, and Pine Valley, that boast more than one hole worthy of the deepest of architectural dives. The 12th might be the most famous par 3 in the world, so short, so beguiling, so critical to Masters outcomes. The par 5 13th has been considered one of the greatest holes in golf nearly from the moment it was created, and maybe no hole has been more seen by golfers than the 18th, the site of nationally televised coronations since the 1950s. But if we're trying to understand the purpose and evolution of Augusta National's architecture, specifically how technology and tournament golf have shaped the course since the first Masters was played in 1934, there's no better hole to study than the long, brutish par 4 11th. Augusta National was not always what it appears to be today. Chairman Clifford Roberts and Bobby Jones began making alterations immediately once they observed the playing conditions, the way the game's best players attacked the course, and how patrons moved about while viewing the action. Before the end of the 1930s, significant reconstruction had occurred on holes like 7, 9, 10, and 14. The story of how Augusta National has altered and flexed out its design, how it morphed from this to this, can be told through the transformation of the 11th hole. As we know it today, the 11th begins with a drive over a valley to a crowned fairway, followed by a long second shot downhill into a green angled menacingly against a mirrored blue pond. It's historically the most difficult hole at Augusta National in relation to par, with a stroke average of over 4.3, and it currently clocks in at 520 yards of muscle and electricity. It didn't start out that way. The 11th hole that Alistair McKenzie and Bobby Jones designed in 1931, named White Dogwood for the 155 white dogwood trees that lined the fairway, was conceived as the second hole. After the inaugural Masters, the nines were switched, since holes 2, 3, and 4, today's 11th, 12th, and 13th, sat in the lowest section of the course and took the longest to warm up, and sometimes even thaw out after a morning frost. Not ideal for early tournament rounds. Remember, the first Masters was played in March, not April. Had the sides not been swapped, it's unlikely this trio of holes would have earned immortality as Amen Corner, as Herbert Warren Wind christened them in 1958. Flameouts seldom become legendary when they happen on the first 9. We recognize the 11th as the beginning of the fate-altering descent into Amen Corner, but the McKenzie-Jones version of the hole didn't look or play anything like it does today. As we can see on this routing map that McKenzie drew in 1932, the original 11th played 76 feet downhill from tee set above and behind the area that's now the 10th green. This is an elevation of the 10th and 11th hole, which were originally, as we said, holes 1 and 2. The original green on 10 was down in this hollow, and in 1938, Perry Maxwell moved it up to this knoll, where it still resides today. The 11th tee was behind the green here at 10, approximately right here, which corresponds to this elevation on the 11th hole. And as you can see, the original 11th tee was right behind the 10th green. This section of the Augusta National property, which is the far southern end of the old Fruitland Nursery, opposite where the clubhouse compound stands, was the most heavily wooded part, and holes 10, 11, and 12 had to be sliced out of the existing pines. 11 measured 405 yards for the members and 430 yards from the tournament tees, but played much shorter because of its downhill orientation. The official yardage for the first dozen or so Masters was 415 yards. Right in the middle of the fairway was a cluster of small bunkers. McKenzie modeled this complex, like many other aspects of Augusta National, on a prominent feature at St. Andrews, the Principal's Nose bunker at the 16th hole. You can see those Principal's Nose bunkers here in this photograph that's marked 1948. The placement of these bunkers divided the hole into 2 sections, forcing players to choose a side to play to. McKenzie described the ideal second shot as playing slightly back into the tilt of the putting surface, nestled into the bend of a stream that feeds into Rays Creek. The club struggled economically in its early years during the height of the Great Depression, and from 1943 to 1945, amid America's involvement in World War II, no Masters tournaments were played. With scant funds to maintain the course, Augusta temporarily let the holes go to pasture and actually raised and grazed livestock on the course in an attempt to generate income. According to Cliff Roberts, they lost money on this too. But after the war, the country and the club found itself armed with a different, more forward-looking mindset as life in tournament golf resumed. Players like Byron Nelson, Ben Hogan, and Sam Snead were in their playing prime, and they were joined by a new generation of professional golfers. This was the impetus of Augusta National to hire Robert Trent Jones, the country's preeminent golf architect of the 1940s and 50s, to begin a modernization program that included remodeling many of the greens and bunkers and constructing an entirely new par 3 16th. By the time Trent Jones saw it, the 11th had become essentially a drive and pitch hole. The central fairway bunkers McKenzie had built to force players to choose one side or the other was no longer in play because contestants were routinely driving over it, a downhill carry of perhaps 230 yards. A big hitter, Trent Jones wrote in his 1988 book, Golf's Magnificent Challenge, could slice the ball around the corner and get it almost to the green. It was really an inadequate hole for the length the professionals were driving the ball. Furthermore, the creek bed that protected the green was often low and allowed for players to recover, just as they could when coming up short on the par 5 13th. Trent Jones was not someone who needed help inventing ways to make holes more difficult, and he had two proposals. The first was to dam the creek next to the green that created a small pond where recovery would no longer be an option. 2 bunkers were later added behind the green. The second change was the shifting of the tees from its place on the knoll behind the 10th green to a lower grove of pines 90 yards to the left. This move achieved 3 things. It turned 11 from a dogleg-right into a fairly straight hole. It turned a running drive into one that went slightly uphill and didn't chase. And it added 30 yards to the hole, making it the 3rd longest par 4 at Augusta National, and now one of the course's most difficult. It's hard to imagine an Amen Corner being what it is today without the Trent Jones alterations to the 11th. What made the hole so difficult was not just the length, but the degree of difficulty of the approach shot, where soaring downhill irons and woods were at the mercy of the buffeting winds and the typically hard Bermuda grass greens. The incoming shot is not just long and perilous with water lurking. It also demands precision, since the green is slightly plateaued, falling away sharply into the pond short left, and sliding down around a slope off the right flank. The big mound short and right of the green also factor into the approach shot, though more in the past than they do today. Over the years, they became more formalized as a distinctive characteristic of the hole. Early on, and during dry years when the ryegrass overseat of the fairways was firm, balls coming in from the left could carom off the mounds and get close to the putting surface. Now the mounds prevent balls that land short from traveling even farther right, almost like a backstop for players punching shots out of the left woods from above, but they won't redirect balls all the way onto the putting surface due to the softer nature of the conditions. The area directly right of the green has also been adjusted, both raised and lowered at different times, but generally tied into the grade of the putting surface. It fades slowly into a shallow here near the 12th fairway. The green surface and even the pond itself have been rebuilt several times due to flooding. Before the 1999 tournament, both were raised 1 foot, and the back left of the putting surface was extended to create a new hole location that almost no one shoots for fear of going into the pond and raised creek behind. Players can't win the Masters on the 11th hole, but they can lose it. Getting through the 11th cleanly on Sunday is a virtual mandate for taking the green jacket. Since 1990, only 5 players have bogeyed the hole and still won. Ben Hogan allegedly said that if you ever saw his second shot at 11 on the putting surface, you'd know he pulled his approach. His tactic was to play short and right, and then make his par the hard way. The water feature added an outsized psychological and penal aspect to 11, but the hole wasn't without strategy. In this photograph taken in the 1970s, you can see how wide the fairway was at the top of the hill at 11. If you drove the ball down the right side, you would have a direct shot into the depth of the green with the bailout on the right. If you drew the ball down the left side of the fairway, you could draw the ball into the green, hit it straight through, or even use the mounds here to ricochet a ball onto the front of the putting surface if the conditions were firm. From the early 1950s until the late 1990s, the 11th played 445 yards and was effectively the same hole year after year, with only grading alterations around the green. That began to change in 1999 when the tee was extended 10 yards. 1999 was also the first year the tournament introduced the second cut of rough, which narrowed the fairway to 45 yards across, taking away the angles that many players tried to access with the tee shot. Though the scoring at the 11th had only marginally eased from 1989 to 2001, when it played to a stroke average of 4.19, Augusta National was becoming increasingly concerned about the distances players were driving the ball, with good reason. During the 2001 Masters, Chairman Hootie Johnson and consulting architect Tom Fazio were watching play on 11 when a golf ball bounced down the fairway and stopped just 94 yards from the green. "We thought somebody had chipped out of the woods," Johnson said. But what they witnessed was Phil Mickelson's drive, a shot that traveled 361 yards, leaving just a sand wedge to a green historically designed to be approached with a 3, 4, or 5 iron. The desire to preserve the balance between the types of shots players had traditionally hit into the greens and the surge in how far the golf ball was flying inspired the most significant spate of alterations to Augusta National since the 1950s, what came to be called the tiger-proofing of the course, that the club had begun contemplating after Tiger Woods shot a then-record 270 or 18 under par in 1997. Leading up to the 2002 Masters, the club lengthened the course to 7,270 yards from its previous distance of 6,985 yards, an increase of 285 yards that specifically targeted several par 4 holes. The 11th alone was stretched from 455 yards to 490 yards. Between 2002 and 2005, the added length at 11 contributed to a jump in stroke average of over 1/10 of a point to 4.3 shots per player. But Augusta National wasn't satisfied, making good on Hootie Johnson's promise to be more aggressive in enforcing between the lines hitting, something that was never a part of the course's architectural makeup during the previous 70 years. The club embarked on an added measure in 2004 to narrow the 11th fairway by further planting 36 mature pines along the right side of the hole. The transplanted trees reduced the 11th fairway to just 35 yards across, nearly half of what it was in 1998. And drives that went to the right now ended up in the pines, sometimes yielding a shot to the green, often requiring punch-outs and occasionally resulting in broken clubs, as Tiger Woods found out in 2007. In a curious case of inverse rewards, drives that went extremely right could find this alleyway between the newly planted pines and the old far right edge of the fairway, and could actually find an open alleyway here between the two sets of pines where they could have a clear shot down to the green. Perhaps it was karmic justice then that the pushed drive Woods hit during his 2019 victory wasn't stymied behind a tree, but rather found the alleyway, giving him an opening through which he could hit the green and make his par, setting the table for the tournament-defining drama that was about to unfold on 12. Remember, this same position used to be the edge of the fairway where many players attempted to place their drives. In 2006, another round of course lengthening totaling 155 yards took place, bumping Augusta National's overall distance to 7,445 yards and the length of the 11th to 505 yards. In just 6 Masters, the course had expanded by 460 yards, and the 11th had been stretched from 445 yards to 505 yards. Augusta has always insisted that scoring totals don't factor into their remodeling decisions, but given the contortions the 11th has gone through, it's evident that special emphasis has been placed on keeping it one of the most difficult on the course. From 2006 to 2020, the whole stroke average rose slightly to 4.37, a reflection that the changes made in 2002 and 2006 were holding serve against the distance gains. But for how long? The overall winning scores at the Masters from 2017 through 2021 averaged 13.4 strokes under par, the lowest scores in relation to par over a 5-year stretch in the history of the tournament. This on a course that played nearly 7,500 yards. To the powers that wear the green jackets, it was once again time to go to the bullpen and bring in the 11th hole to help put out the fire. So, prior to the 2022 Masters, another 15 yards of distance was added, stretching 11 out to 520 yards and making it the longest par 4 on the course by 25 yards. It was even 10 yards longer than the 13th, a par 5. More remodeling was done on the right side of the fairway. The club removed the majority of those pine trees that they'd planted in 2004. They did leave a small cluster here 240 yards from the tee on the right, but those don't really come into play. They also left 3 solitary pines farther down the fairway starting at about 340 yards. Nobody intentionally tries to hit their ball over here, but if they do, there's more of a chance for recovery of punching a shot low and onto the green, at least more so than when there were pines. So the fairway plays wider now and is slightly more forgiving, but players are still not trying to hit it to the right. They're trying to hit it in the middle of the fairway, which has been leveled out more than it used to be. It used to slope from right to left. Now you get more of a level lie shooting down into the 11th green. The right corner of the pond was also brought into the fairway slightly, further cutting off that front left hole location and narrowing the gap between the water and the mounds on the right. The immediate impact of these changes likely satisfied tournament officials. In 2022, the hole played to a stroke average of 4.47, the highest total since 2016, and the fourth highest average in the previous 40 years. More importantly, the modifications ensured that, for now, 11th remains a terrifying landmine, especially for players coming down the stretch on Sunday. So that's the long, strange journey of Augusta National's 11th hole, and the many ways the club has attempted to fortify its design, in real time, against the continual onslaughts of the professional game, a dance that's never likely to stop. And still, despite the ever-expanding string of tees, the inhale-exhale of the fairway space, and the tinkering around the pond and green, the 11th hole at Augusta National has remained one of the great second-shot holes in golf, and arguably the game's most premium test of iron play, nerve, and willpower. But no matter what adaptations happen in the future, you can bet Augusta National will do whatever it takes to protect that distinction.